Your nightly routine could be putting you at risk for a stroke, and you might not even know it. Tonight, we're not just talking about medical facts. We're telling the story of an entire town on the brink of a health crisis, all because of deadly sleep habits hiding in plain sight. From long afternoon naps to the comfort of a favorite recliner, the danger is closer than you think. Don't miss a single warning sign. Like this video to help spread awareness, and subscribe to our channel for essential health stories. Let's begin. The sign that welcomed Dr. Evelyn Reed to Serenity Cove was made of weathered driftwood, the letters carved by a loving, steady hand. It promised a life of peace, a refuge from the relentless chaos she had left behind. After years in the city, where the wail of sirens was the constant soundtrack to her life, and every case was a high-stakes battle against the clock, this quiet New England fishing town felt like a different world. Salt-laced air, sharp and clean, filled her lungs. Gulls cried overhead, their calls echoing between the charming clapboard houses painted in hues of sea glass and sand. It was perfect, almost too perfect. Her new practice was housed in a small historic building just off the main harbor. The previous neurologist, a man who had served the town for 40 years, had left everything behind. His office was a time capsule of medicine, shelves filled with heavy, leather-bound neurology textbooks sat beside a computer that took a full 5 minutes to boot up. The air smelled of old paper, antiseptic, and the faint, lingering scent of the sea. As Evelyn organized her modern diagnostic tools, she felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. She had come here for a slower pace, to treat patients as people, not just a collection of symptoms on a chart. But the quiet in Serenity Cove felt different. It felt heavy, as if it were holding secrets. Her first significant patient was the living embodiment of the town itself, Arthur Pendleton. At 68, he was the owner of the town's small but proud fishing fleet, a man whose face was a roadmap of his years at sea, with lines etched by sun and salt. He walked into her office with a confident stride that only wavered for a split second, a tiny stumble he tried to cover with a cough. "Dr. Reed," he began, his voice a low rumble, shaking her hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "The town's happy to have you. Hope you're not planning on changing things too much." I'm just here to help, Mr. Pendleton," Evelyn replied with a warm smile, gesturing for him to sit. "What brings you in today?" Arthur settled into the chair, his posture rigid with pride. "It's nothing really, just some fog," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Brain's not as sharp as it used to be, and a bit of dizziness now and then. Dr. Finch just says it's me getting on in my years, but it's affecting my work." Evelyn listened, her focus entirely on him. She noticed the slight furrow of his brow, the way his eyes darted around the room as if searching for an anchor. "Tell me more about this fog," she prompted gently. "When does it happen? How does it feel?" "It feels like trying to think through cotton," he grumbled. "And the dizziness hits when I stand up too fast. But look, I'm as healthy as a horse. I work 12-hour days. I don't have time for this." Evelyn nodded, making notes. "Your blood pressure is a bit elevated, according to your chart. Let's talk about your lifestyle, your sleep, for instance. How many hours a night do you typically get?" Arthur let out a short, barking laugh. "Sleep is for the weak, doctor. I run a fleet. The ocean doesn't rest, and neither do I. 4, maybe 5 hours a night is all I've ever needed. It's how I built my business from a single boat." The boast hung in the air, and for Evelyn, it was not a sign of strength, but a blaring alarm. She had seen this kind of pride before in the city, in high-powered executives and overworked surgeons. It was the pride that came before the fall. "Mr. Pendleton," she began carefully, "science tells a very different story. For adults, especially over 60, sleeping fewer than 6 hours a night can significantly raise your blood pressure and put your body into a state of constant stress. It can make your blood more likely to clot. That brain fog and dizziness you're experiencing, it could be your brain telling you it's not getting the steady blood flow it needs to function properly." Arthur's smile vanished. He leaned back, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression hardening into a wall of skepticism. "With all due respect, doctor, that sounds like some new age nonsense. I'm a fisherman, not a scientist. Hard work and a little grit are what keep a man going, not 8 hours in a bed. Oh. Before Evelyn could respond, the door opened and a tall, silver-haired man in a tweed jacket walked in. He had a kind face, but his eyes held a hint of weary authority. "Arthur, I thought I might find you here," he said, his voice smooth and familiar. He turned to Evelyn. "Dr. Reed, Alistair Finch. I'm the town's general practitioner. Just wanted to officially welcome you." "Dr. Finch, it's a pleasure," Evelyn said, standing to shake his hand. "I was just telling Dr. Reed that all this modern talk about sleep is a bit much," Arthur announced, looking to Dr. Finch for validation. "She thinks I'm dizzy because I don't nap enough." Dr. Finch gave a paternalistic chuckle, patting Arthur on the shoulder. "Arthur here is as tough as they come, Dr. Reed. He's just feeling his age, like the rest of us. A little less salt in his diet, perhaps a bit more rest when he can get it. He'll be fine." He turned to Evelyn, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You'll find our residents are quite resilient. They don't fit neatly into the latest medical journals." The dismissal was polite, but clear. Evelyn felt the invisible walls of the town's traditions closing in. Dr. Finch represented the old guard, a way of thinking that was comfortable, familiar, and potentially dangerous. After both men had left, Evelyn stood alone in her quiet office. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, making the familiar space feel alien. She looked out the window at the harbor, where the calm water reflected the soft colors of the sky. Serenity Cove. It was beautiful, peaceful, and serene, but she now understood that its tranquility was a deception, a placid surface hiding dangerous currents beneath, and she was the only one who seemed to see just how deep and how deadly they could be. The emergency call didn't come from a dispatcher, but from a frantic voice on her office line. It was David Bellwether, his tone tight with panic. His mother, Clara, the sweet-faced woman who won the town's baking competition every year, had collapsed. By the time Evelyn arrived at the Bellwethers' cozy, blue-shuttered cottage, Clara was sitting up in a floral armchair, looking pale but composed, a half-finished cup of tea trembling in her hand. The scent of cinnamon and baked apples hung in the air, a warm, comforting blanket that couldn't quite cover the sharp chill of fear. "It was just a dizzy spell, dear," Clara insisted, her voice soft as worn velvet. "David is making a fuss." But Evelyn's trained eyes saw more than a simple dizzy spell. She saw the slight droop at the corner of Clara's mouth, the way her left hand lay unnaturally still in her lap. After a series of gentle tests checking her reflexes, asking her to smile, to raise both arms, Evelyn's initial suspicion was confirmed. "Mrs. Bellwether, it appears you've had a minor ischemic stroke," Evelyn said, her voice calm and reassuring, deliberately masking the seriousness of the diagnosis. "It means a small clot briefly blocked blood flow to a part of your brain. The good news is that it seems to have resolved on its own, but we need to understand why it happened." David, a man in his late 40s with his mother's kind eyes and a protective stance, paced the small living room. "But how? She's healthy. She gets plenty of rest." Dr. Finch always said her heart was strong for her age. "Rest is important," Evelyn agreed, turning a thoughtful gaze to Clara. "Tell me about your sleep. Do you rest well at night?" "Oh, heavens. No," David answered for her, a proud smile breaking through his worry. "She's up and down all night, but she makes up for it. Every day, after lunch, she takes a good long nap. 2 hours, sometimes more. Solid as a rock. She gets more rest than anyone I know." Clara nodded in agreement. "It's my little luxury. The house is quiet. The sun comes through the window. It's the best sleep of the day." For David, this was proof of his mother's well-cared-for life. For Evelyn, it was another blaring alarm, louder and more urgent than Arthur Pendleton's prideful sleep deprivation. Long, heavy afternoon naps weren't a luxury. They were a cry for help. "Mr. Bellwether," Evelyn began, choosing her words with care. "Those long naps, they aren't a sign of good rest. They're a symptom. When someone needs to sleep that deeply during the day, it's often because their body isn't getting the restorative sleep it needs at night." She turned back to Clara. When you wake up in the morning, do you feel refreshed? Or are you still tired? Clara hesitated, her gaze dropping to the teacup in her hands. Well, I suppose I am a bit tired most mornings, she admitted quietly. But at my age, I thought that was normal. It's common, but it's not necessarily normal, Evelyn explained gently. Fragmented nighttime sleep, the kind where you're up and down, puts a tremendous strain on the cardiovascular system. Your body is trying, and failing, to recharge. That exhaustion builds up, and the long nap is your body's emergency shutdown. The stroke you experienced, it's very likely linked to this cycle. An underlying issue, perhaps a heart condition we haven't diagnosed, could be what's disrupting your sleep at night. David stopped pacing. His expression shifted from worried to defensive. What are you saying? That her naps caused this? She's been napping like that for years. It's her routine. It comforts her. I'm not saying the naps caused it, Evelyn clarified patiently. I'm saying they are a giant red flag, pointing to a deeper problem that did. We need to run some tests, including a heart monitor she can wear at home, to see what's happening while she sleeps. The mention of more tests seemed to flip a switch in David. His friendly demeanor evaporated, replaced by a cool suspicion. My mother has just had a stroke. The last thing she needs is to be poked and prodded with a bunch of new machines. You're just going to stress her out. Oh? He took a step closer, his voice dropping. You know, Dr. Finch has been our family doctor for 30 years. He's a close friend. He's always been very clear. At a certain age, the best medicine is to not overcomplicate things. Maybe this is all just too much for her right now. The implication was crystal clear. Evelyn wasn't just a doctor, she was an outsider with new, complicated ideas that threatened the town's comfortable status quo. She was challenging not only a patient's habits, but the trusted word of the doctor who had enabled them. Evelyn met his gaze, her expression unwavering but her heart sinking. She had come to Serenity Cove to escape the battles of the city hospital, but she was quickly learning that the battles here were just as fierce. They were simply quieter, fought not in trauma bays but in cozy living rooms, against an invisible enemy of tradition and a dangerous resistance to change. She left the cottage with a treatment plan in her briefcase, but the weight of David's distrust and the long shadow of Dr. Finch's influence felt far heavier. Gable's Hardware was the beating heart of Serenity Cove. It was the place people went not just for nails and paint, but for news, for gossip, and for the booming, infectious laugh of its owner, Bernard Gable, known to everyone, simply as Barney. At 65, Barney was a big man with a kind, weathered face and a smile that seemed permanently fixed in place. He was a fixture in the town, as solid and dependable as the steel tools he sold. Barney's snoring was also the stuff of legend. At town potlucks and backyard barbecues, it was a familiar, affectionate joke. "Hey, Barney," a neighbor would call out. "Wind must have picked up last night. Thought I heard you sleeping from my place." Barney would just laugh, a great rumbling sound, and fire back a joke of his own. To Serenity Cove, Barney's snoring wasn't a problem. It was part of the local soundscape, a sign that all was steady, all was normal. But for his wife, Mildred, that sound had become a symphony of terror. Mildred Gable slipped into Evelyn's office on a Tuesday afternoon, a light drizzle blurring the world outside. She moved quietly, as if hoping not to be seen, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. She was a small, gentle woman, the anxiety etched on her face a stark contrast to her husband's boisterous nature. "Dr. Reed," she began, her voice trembling, "I've come without Barney knowing. He'd be furious if he knew I was here." "You're in a safe place, Mrs. Gable," Evelyn said softly, gesturing for her to sit. "Anything we discuss here is confidential. What can I help you with?" Mildred took a deep, shuddering breath, as if gathering all her courage. "It's his snoring," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The whole town jokes about it. He jokes about it, but it's not a joke. It's getting worse." She leaned forward, her eyes wide, with a fear that was years in the making. "It starts like a freight train, doctor, but then it stops." A sudden, deathly silence. I count the seconds. 5, 10, sometimes 15. His whole body goes rigid. And then he starts again with this awful, choking gasp, a violent jerk, like he's been pulled from underwater. It happens over and over, all night long. Evelyn listened, every word Mildred spoke painting a clear clinical picture. This was not simple snoring. This was a textbook case of severe obstructive sleep apnea. I shake him, Mildred continued, tears now welling in her eyes. I tell him he stopped breathing. He just grunts that I'm imagining things, rolls over, and the snoring starts again. In the morning, he remembers nothing, just complains that he's tired and his head hurts. "You are not imagining it, Mrs. Gable," Evelyn said, her tone firm but compassionate. "What you are describing are the classic signs of obstructive sleep apnea. When your husband sleeps, the muscles in his throat are relaxing and collapsing, cutting off his airway. The silence you hear is the moment he isn't breathing at all." Evelyn looked directly at Mildred, ensuring she understood the gravity of the situation. Each one of those pauses is starving his brain of oxygen. His heart has to work incredibly hard to compensate. This is putting a tremendous strain on his entire cardiovascular system, night after night. It raises blood pressure and dramatically increases the risk of a stroke or a heart attack. Mildred brought a hand to her mouth, a small, strangled sob escaping. "So, what do I do? He won't listen to me. He's too proud. We need him to do a sleep study," Evelyn explained. "It's an overnight test that will monitor his breathing, oxygen levels, and heart activity. If the diagnosis is confirmed, the most effective treatment is a machine called a CPAP." The moment the word left Evelyn's lips, Mildred's face fell. "No, absolutely not. He would never agree to wear a mask to bed. He'll say it's for old, frail men, that it's a sign of weakness. He would rather do nothing." The stark reality of the situation hung in the air. Barney's greatest enemy wasn't his medical condition, it was his own embarrassment and pride. The town's laughter had turned a dangerous symptom into a personality trait, making it impossible for him to take it seriously. Evelyn realized a prescription couldn't fix this. "Mildred," she said, using her first name to close the distance between them, "this is no longer a debate about stubbornness. This is about his life." The call that pulled Evelyn away from her quiet afternoon of research wasn't an emergency, but it carried an urgency that was impossible to ignore. It was from the small Serenity Cove Clinic, a place run by 2 nurses and overseen, from a distance, by Dr. Finch. A patient had come in complaining of a fluttering in his chest. His name was Walter Finch. When Evelyn arrived, she found a man who was the complete opposite of his brother. Where Alistair was tall, composed, and wore tweed jackets like a uniform, Walter was a bundle of restless energy. At 73, he was lean and sun-browned, dressed in fishing waders and a flannel shirt, his eyes sparkling with a mischievous, untamed energy. He was charming, but he also looked exhausted, a fine tremor in the hands he rested on his knees. "Dr. Reed, thanks for coming down," Walter said, his voice a gravelly twin to his brother's smoother tones. "The nurses here are treating me like I'm made of glass. It's just my ticker acting up, a bit of a hiccup. A hiccup that's been going on for 2 hours, Walter," the head nurse interjected, handing Evelyn a chart. Evelyn smiled warmly. "Let's take a look. Tell me what it feels like, Mr. Finch." "Call me Walter," he insisted. "It feels like a fish flopping around in my chest. Skips a beat, then races to catch up. I've had it before, but never this long. Probably just the freedom of retirement finally getting to me." He laughed, but the sound was thin, lacking the conviction of his usual good humor. As Evelyn attached the electrocardiogram leads to his chest, she started her usual line of questioning. "Let's talk about your routine, Walter. What does a typical day look like for you?" Walter grinned, a wide, proud smile. "There's no such thing." "That's the beauty of it. One night, I'm up till 2 in the morning watching old war movies. The next, I'm in bed by 9, so I can be on the boat before the sun is up. No clocks, no schedule. Just pure, glorious freedom." Evelyn watched the erratic, jagged lines dance across the electrocardiogram monitor. They were a perfect visual representation of the life Walter had just described. chaotic, unpredictable, and dangerously unstable. Just as she was about to speak, the clinic door swung open and Dr. Alistair Finch strode in, his face a mask of concern. "Walter? What's all this? Nurse Carol said you were having palpitations." "I'm fine, Alistair. Just a little flutter," Walter said dismissively. Alistair's gaze went from his brother to the electrocardiogram monitor, and the professional calm he usually wore slipped. He didn't need a specialist to read the frantic rhythm. He turned to Evelyn, his eyes searching, a flicker of vulnerability in his expression. Evelyn spoke calmly, her voice a steady anchor in the tense room. "He's in atrial fibrillation. His heart's upper chambers are beating out of sync with the lower one." "But why?" Alistair asked, the question directed at her, the town doctor deferring to the newcomer. "His heart has always been strong." Evelyn met his gaze directly, not with accusation, but with the quiet authority of fact. "Let's talk about his sleep," she said, deliberately using the word that had become a point of contention between them. She explained Walter's chaotic schedule, the late nights followed by early mornings, the complete absence of a biological rhythm. "Our bodies thrive on consistency, Dr. Finch," she explained, her tone educational, not confrontational. "The heart, in particular, relies on the steady, predictable signals from our internal clock, our circadian rhythm. When that rhythm is constantly thrown into chaos, it's like sending a storm of confusing signals to the heart's electrical system. Hormones and blood pressure swing unpredictably. For a heart over the age of 70, that kind of sustained stress can be enough to push it into an arrhythmia like AFib." She gestured toward the frantic lines on the monitor. "What you're seeing there isn't just a random event, it's the physiological result of a life without rhythm. The freedom of retirement is, in this case, putting his cardiovascular system under immense strain." Silence fell over the small room, broken only by the beep and scratch of the EKG. Walter looked from Evelyn to his brother, his cheerful facade finally crumbling, revealing the fear beneath. Alistair stared at the screen, then at his brother's pale face, and finally at Evelyn. For the first time, this wasn't about a stubborn fisherman or an anxious widow. This was his own brother, his own blood. And the logic connecting the harmless lifestyle to the dangerous condition on the screen was undeniable. It was a direct, personal refutation of the comfortable, dismissive stance he had held for so long. He cleared his throat, the sound rough. The wall of professional pride he had built between himself and Evelyn seemed to dissolve in that moment, replaced by the raw concern of a family member and the humility of a doctor facing a truth he could no longer ignore. "So," Alistair said, his voice quiet, his eyes meeting hers with a new, grudging respect, "what do you recommend we do?" Isabella Rossi lived in a small, lavender-trimmed cottage filled with the ghosts of a happy marriage. Her husband, Marco, had passed away 2 years ago, and the silence he left behind was a physical presence, a weight that pressed down on her most heavily in the dark. At 75, Isabella was a woman of quiet strength, but grief had hollowed out her nights, leaving them empty and terrifyingly long. Her solution came in a small, blue and white box from the town pharmacy. Over-the-counter sleeping pills. What began as an occasional aid on the worst nights had become a non-negotiable ritual. One small pill, a glass of water, and the promise of a few hours of numb, dreamless escape. Evelyn was called to Isabella's home not by a patient, but by a concerned neighbor who had found her on the floor, disoriented and bruised after a fall. When Evelyn arrived, Isabella was sitting at her kitchen table, a faded photograph of her and Marco in her hands, her explanation a whispered confession. "I must have just lost my footing," she said, avoiding Evelyn's eyes. "I'm getting clumsy in my old age." But Evelyn noticed the half-empty box of sedatives on the counter. She saw the lingering fog in Isabella's eyes and the slight slur in her speech. "Isabella," she asked gently, "how often are you taking these?" The question broke through the fragile wall of her composure. Isabella's shoulders slumped. "Every night," she admitted. "It's the only way I can turn off my thoughts, the only way I can get through the night without him." "Oh." Evelyn listened, her heart filled with compassion. This wasn't a case of simple medication misuse. It was a symptom of a deep, unhealed wound. These pills may feel like a friend, but they are incredibly dangerous, Evelyn explained, her voice soft but firm. They don't provide true restorative sleep, they simply sedate you. They can disrupt your heart's natural rhythm, and the grogginess they cause the next day is a major reason for falls and injuries in older adults. The confusion you felt this morning wasn't clumsiness, it was a side effect of the medication. She took Isabella's hand, her touch warm and steady. The real problem isn't your sleep, Isabella. It's the grief that's keeping you awake. The pills are a bandage, but they will never heal the source of the pain. Evelyn knew that simply taking away the pills would be cruel. She had to offer a different kind of medicine. She spent the next hour not talking about neurology, but about Marco. She listened as Isabella shared stories, laughed through tears, and spoke his name aloud in a way she hadn't in months. Before she left, Evelyn made 2 calls. The first was to the local community center to enroll Isabella in a gentle evening yoga class. The second was to Eleanor Vance. She asked the retired professor, who was now leading the grief support group, if she would pay Isabella a visit. The path to healing, Evelyn knew, wasn't found in a pill bottle. It was found in connection, in shared stories, and in the slow, difficult work of allowing the heart to feel its sorrow without needing to numb it into silence. A pattern was emerging, a dark tapestry woven from the threads of her patients' lives. It was more than just a collection of individual bad habits. Evelyn felt a growing certainty that something larger was at play, something systemic to Serenity Cove itself. The realization came to her one evening, walking home after a long day. She had made it a habit to walk through the town as dusk fell, observing the rhythms of the community. That night, she saw it all with new eyes. The town council had recently installed new LED streetlights, a point of civic pride meant to enhance safety, but they were intensely bright, casting a harsh, blue-toned glare that bleached the color from the night and seeped through even the thickest curtains. Then there was the town's iconic lighthouse. For centuries, its powerful beam had swept across the sea, a beacon for sailors. But it also swept across the town, its rhythmic, hypnotic flash slicing through bedroom windows every 45 seconds, a constant, subconscious interruption. And finally, there was the sound, the low, mournful hum of the foghorns from the harbor, a sound so constant that most residents no longer consciously heard it. But the brain heard it. All night long, these subtle environmental cues, the unnatural light, the pulsing beam, the pervasive sound were sending a clear message to the sleeping minds of Serenity Cove. Stay alert. It is not safe to rest deeply. Evelyn realized she wasn't just fighting personal habits, she was fighting the town's very identity. She theorized that this constant, low-level environmental stimulation was disrupting melatonin production on a community-wide scale, contributing to the poor sleep quality that was the root cause of so many of her cases. It was a radical idea, and she knew it. To suggest that the town's beloved lighthouse and its brand new safety lights were part of the problem felt like an attack on Serenity Cove itself. But the evidence was all around her, hiding in plain sight. The town's serene facade was a lie, not just because of the secrets held within its homes, but because of the very air and light that defined it. Her most stubborn patient was Samuel Jones, a 74-year-old retired shipbuilder whose hands, though gnarled with arthritis, still held the quiet strength of a man who had spent his life shaping wood and steel. For the last 10 years, Samuel had not slept in a bed. His nights were spent in a large, overstuffed recliner, a throne of worn leather that he claimed was the only thing that eased his chronic back pain. He came to Evelyn complaining of persistent morning headaches and a tingling numbness in his hands that he, like so many others, had brushed off as just getting old. "Lying flat is torture, Doc," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "This chair is the only place I can get a wink of sleep." Evelyn understood his reasoning, but she also saw the immense danger. "Samuel, I want to show you something," she said, leading him to the small ultrasound machine in her office. With a bit of gel on his neck, she placed the Doppler probe against his carotid artery. A rhythmic whoosh-whoosh filled the room, the sound of his own blood flowing to his brain. "Now," she said gently, I want you to tilt your head forward, tucking your chin toward your chest, just like you do when you sleep in the recliner." As he did, the sound changed dramatically. The strong, steady rhythm faltered, becoming a weak, strained trickle. On the screen, the vibrant colors representing blood flow faded to a pale, worrying blue. "Do you see, Samuel?" Evelyn said, her voice quiet but clear. "That position, night after night, is kinking the main artery to your brain. It's like pinching a garden hose. The numbness in your hands, the headaches, those are your brain and nerves crying out for oxygen. Your chair may feel like a comfort, but it's slowly suffocating your brain." Samuel stared at the screen, his tough exterior cracking. The visual, undeniable evidence did what words could not. He saw and heard the truth for himself. Fear replaced his stubbornness. "But my back," he whispered, his voice filled with a desperate vulnerability. "We will find another way," Evelyn promised. She spent the rest of the appointment on the phone with a physical therapist, scheduling an urgent consultation. The solution wasn't to force Samuel into a painful position, but to find a supportive mattress, the right pillows, and gentle stretches that could give him a night of truly restful and safe sleep. Armed with a file full of case studies, sleep statistics, and a Doppler ultrasound image of Samuel Jones's compressed artery, Evelyn requested an emergency town hall meeting. The room was packed. The air crackled with a mixture of curiosity, defensiveness, and outright hostility. Evelyn stood at the front, a lone figure against a backdrop of the town's skeptical leadership, including the mayor, a proud, traditional man named Robert Thompson, and a visibly conflicted Dr. Finch. Calmly and methodically, she laid out her case. She didn't use complex medical jargon. She told stories. She spoke of Arthur's pride, Clara's naps, Eleanor's grief, Barney's fear, and Samuel's pain. She connected the dots, drawing a direct line from their individual struggles to the broader, invisible threats of the town's environment. She presented her findings about the streetlights and the lighthouse, not as an accusation, but as a shared community problem. "Sleep is not a luxury," she concluded, her voice ringing with passion. "It is a biological necessity. And as a community, the way we are living and the environment we have created is quietly pushing us toward a public health crisis." The room erupted. "You're blaming our lighthouse for our health problems?" one man shouted. "That's absurd. She's saying we're all too stupid to know how to sleep," another resident called out. The mayor, Robert Thompson, stood up, his face flushed with indignation. "Dr. Reed, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but the people of Serenity Cove are strong and resilient. We are not fragile. We do not need a newcomer telling us how to live our lives. This meeting is adjourned." He banged the gavel, the sharp crack echoing the closing of minds. As people filed out, muttering and shaking their heads, Evelyn felt a wave of defeat. She had presented them with the truth, but they had chosen to cling to the comfort of their dangerous habits. The emergency call came less than an hour later. It was from a panicked town clerk. During a heated post-meeting debate in his office about modern nonsense, Mayor Thompson had collapsed. When Evelyn rushed to the clinic, she found a scene of controlled chaos. The mayor was on a gurney, his face slack on one side, his speech a garbled, unintelligible mess. He was having a major stroke, and standing beside him, his face pale and his hands shaking, was Dr. Alistair Finch. He looked up as Evelyn entered, and in that moment, all professional rivalry, all skepticism, all pride was gone. There was only the raw fear of a doctor out of his depth and the desperate need for help. He met her eyes, his own filled with a terrible, dawning understanding. "Evelyn," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "you were right. Help me, please." The mayor's collapse was the gunshot that shattered the town's serene illusion. It was the undeniable, catastrophic proof of everything Evelyn had warned them about. The very man who had championed the town's stubborn pride had become its most tragic victim. The news of the mayor's stroke spread through Serenity Cove like a wildfire, extinguishing the anger from the town hall meeting and replacing it with a cold, sober fear. The abstract threat Evelyn had described was no longer a theory. It was real, and it had struck down the most powerful man in their community. The change was not instantaneous, but it was profound. It began with small acts of surrender. Barney Gable, his usual booming laughter replaced by a quiet humility, walked into Evelyn's office and asked to be scheduled for a sleep study. Arthur Pendleton, the proud fisherman, was seen in the front row of a sleep hygiene workshop Evelyn held at the community center, taking meticulous notes. Eleanor Vance's grief support group saw its attendance double, becoming a place where residents shared not just their sorrows, but their fears about their health. She and Isabella Rossi became close friends, taking evening walks along the harbor instead of retreating into their lonely homes. The most significant change came from Dr. Finch. Humbled and driven by a new sense of responsibility, he became Evelyn's greatest ally. Together, they addressed the town council. This time, there were no arguments. The council voted unanimously to install shields on the bright LED streetlights, directing their glare downward, and to begin a study on modifying the lighthouse beam's path away from the town's residential areas. It was a slow awakening, a community stirring from a long and dangerous slumber. They were learning a new rhythm, one based not on stubborn tradition, but on the quiet, essential wisdom of the human body. 6 months later, Evelyn stood on the small hill overlooking the harbor, the same spot where Eleanor Vance's lonely house kept watch. The sun was rising, painting the sky in soft shades of rose and gold. The air was still crisp with the scent of salt, but the town below felt different. It was still peaceful, but it was no longer a fragile, deceptive quiet. It was a true and earned serenity. Mayor Thompson was in recovery, his speech slowly returning. He had become the town's most passionate, if soft-spoken, advocate for sleep health. The nights in Serenity Cove were darker now, the stars more visible. The soft glow from the shielded streetlights created pools of gentle light, and the lighthouse beam once again belonged solely to the sea. Evelyn had come to this town seeking a quiet life, a refuge from the high-stakes drama of the city. She had found something far more profound. She had found a purpose, not in fighting dramatic emergencies, but in preventing them, in healing an entire community by uncovering the secrets hidden in the quietest hours of the night. She watched as the first fishing boat of the day, with Arthur Pendleton at the helm, headed out into the open water. He was sleeping 7 hours a night now, and he told everyone he had never felt stronger. A new day was dawning, not just in the sky, but in the heart of Serenity Cove. And as the warm light washed over her, Evelyn Reed finally felt like she was home. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through Serenity Cove. While this story is fictional, the medical principles it's based on are very real. The quality of your sleep has a direct and powerful impact on the health of your brain and your heart. It's a quiet pillar of your well-being that deserves your attention and care. We hope this story has been both entertaining and enlightening. If it has inspired you to think more about your own sleep habits, or those of someone you love, then we have accomplished our goal. Until next time, from all of us here, stay healthy, stay informed, and rest well. We look forward to seeing you again soon.